The Hawker Typhoon arrived at RAF squadrons in September 1941, carrying the weight of Britain's desperate hopes. The Air Ministry urgently needed a fighter capable of catching the Luftwaffe's new FW-190, a brutal German machine that had humiliated Spitfires across the Channel. Sidney Cam's design team at Hawker had built the Typhoon around the massive Napier Sabre engine, a 24-cylinder monster producing over 2,000 horsepower. On paper, it promised 400 miles per hour at altitude and the power to dominate European skies. In practice, however, the Typhoon became a death trap that nearly destroyed its own squadrons before it ever engaged a German aircraft. Pilots reported catastrophic failures within weeks, engines seized without warning, connecting rods punched through cylinder blocks, and entire rear fuselages sometimes detached mid-flight. Carbon monoxide infiltration proved equally lethal. Exhaust gases leaked into cockpits, poisoning pilots during extended missions. Symptoms ranged from nausea and blurred vision to complete unconsciousness. Flight Lieutenant Robert Beaumont nearly died at 15,000 feet during a November 1941 sortie when he lost coherence mid-flight. Hawker's factories, under enormous pressure, had to redesign engine cowling and seal gaps while keeping production going. By early 1942, morale among Typhoon squadrons had collapsed. Pilots dubbed it the Murderer and requested transfers to Spitfire units. Only the lack of alternatives kept the Typhoon in service, as Britain's other advanced fighter, the Westland Whirlwind, had already failed. Commanding officers like Roland Beaumont, now leading 609 Squadron, became its defenders. They argued that the airframe was fundamentally sound and that engine and structural issues were solvable. Beaumont conducted dozens of test flights, documenting failure modes and proposing modifications. Hawker engineers worked tirelessly through winter 1941-42, reinforcing tail structures with additional brackets and heavier aluminum stringers, significantly reducing rear fuselage failures. The Napier Sabre engine, however, remained problematic. Sleeve valves expanded unevenly, causing seizures, while lubricants had to be improved to handle high temperatures. Pilots learned to nurse engines carefully, monitoring cylinder head temperatures obsessively during combat. The Typhoon found its unexpected calling during low-level operations. Its thick wing provided stability, and the powerful Sabre engine performed efficiently at low altitudes. In summer 1942, squadrons began experimenting with attacks against German convoys in the Channel. The aircraft's four 20mm Hispano cannons proved devastating. Pilots discovered they could strike targets at wave-top height, inflicting massive damage before enemy aircraft or anti-aircraft fire could respond effectively. These rhubarb operations turned the Typhoon from a high-altitude failure into a deadly low-level attacker. By late 1942, modifications had restored pilot confidence. Structural failures dropped to almost zero, engine reliability improved, and carbon monoxide risks were mitigated with better ventilation and chemical detectors. Yet, the Typhoon still couldn't perform at high altitudes. FW-190s outclimbed and outmaneuvered it above 20,000 feet. British pilots adapted by exploiting the Typhoon's strengths at low level, focusing on strafing and ground attacks against convoys, trains, and armored vehicles. The real transformation came with the addition of rockets. The 3-inch RP-3 rocket, initially designed for naval use, could be mounted under the wings, turning the Typhoon into a tank killer. Pilots learned steep dive attack techniques, carefully timing pullouts to avoid self-damage. The psychological impact of the rockets was immediate. German troops feared the high-speed, screaming projectiles. By early 1944, 6 Typhoon squadrons had fully transitioned to rocket armament, becoming the primary anti-armor force supporting the 2nd Tactical Air Force. During the Normandy invasion on D-Day, Typhoons flew their first operational rocket sorties. Flight Lieutenant John Baldwin led dives against German artillery positions, collapsing reinforced bunkers and clearing the path for advancing infantry. Despite losses to concentrated anti-aircraft fire, the attacks were devastatingly effective. Typhoon pilots quickly adapted to forward air controller systems, called cab rank operations, where aircraft orbited designated holding points ready to strike on demand. This integration with ground forces revolutionized close air support, drastically shortening response times from hours to minutes. Throughout July and August 1944, Typhoon squadrons harassed German armored divisions during operations like Goodwood. Rockets destroyed or immobilized tanks, half-tracks, and trucks, forcing Germans to disperse, creating traffic jams, and slowing counterattacks. Post-war research confirmed Typhoon strikes were responsible for significant tactical paralysis, even if pilot claims of destroyed tanks were often overestimated. The psychological effect on German crews was immense. Soldiers avoided daylight movement whenever possible, recognizing that concentrated armor was a death sentence under Typhoon attack. Despite the success, the human cost was heavy. Typhoon pilots faced extreme dangers from 88mm anti-aircraft guns, rifles, and even their own rocket blasts. Casualty rates exceeded 23% during intense campaign periods, rivaling bomber command losses. Surviving pilots endured mental and emotional strain, often relying on dark humor and camaraderie to cope. Squadron commanders monitored for signs of psychological collapse, quietly reassigning those unable to manage stress while replacements quickly adapted to brutal realities of low-level attack flying. By the war's end, the Hawker Typhoon had evolved from a near-fatal experiment into a decisive tactical weapon. Between D-Day and Germany's surrender, Typhoon squadrons flew over 36,000 combat sorties, firing 60,000 rockets and 150 million rounds of cannon ammunition. They disrupted German armored operations, destroyed infrastructure, and directly supported advancing Allied troops. Post-war analysis credited Typhoons with helping shorten the war and demonstrated that tactical air power could decisively influence ground combat, shaping NATO's post-war doctrines in close air support and forward air control. Individual stories highlighted heroism and innovation. Roland Beaumont survived with distinguished honors and later flew Britain's first supersonic aircraft. Pierre Clostermann, the French ace, achieved 33 confirmed victories. Yet, for every recognized pilot, dozens of young men lay in Commonwealth war graves, their lives lost in the skies over Europe. The Typhoon itself became obsolete with the jet age, but its legacy endured, teaching lessons about courage, adaptation, and the transformation of failure into triumph. Britain's worst fighter had become precisely what the war demanded, a machine of destruction, a terror to German forces, and a testament to ingenuity under pressure.